for approximately an hour. And our speaker is coming to us from Sioux Falls in South Dakota. And I'm pleased to welcome Michael. Michael?
Hey, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. I really appreciate being here this evening. What a tremendous gift, in the midst of all this chaos going on with COVID and so many other sort of things in our world. What a tremendous opportunity to come together and talk a little bit about what God has done for me. And so I want to thank Rob. I want to thank Dustin. I want to thank the readers. I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. And I certainly want to thank my God, because I would not be here. I am way too stupid to be here. I can tell you that. A gracious God sort of reached in the gutter and yanked out an idiot, and here I am. So, but I'm really glad to be here tonight, and it's a great joy. I also want to take a moment, and I want to talk about three kinds of people in Alcoholics Anonymous. I want to talk about the newcomer, and I want to welcome you tonight. If you're new to Alcoholics Anonymous, or if you're back and you've been here a while or a short while and you went out and you came back, I want you to know that you're welcome in Alcoholics Anonymous. I want you to know that we have a seat for you. I want you to know that there is hope. And I want you to know that there is a solution. And it's significantly more than just simply not drinking one day at a time for the rest of your life. Although that's a tremendous gift. I belittle that not at all. Without that, I would have nothing else. But I got to tell you, I think sobriety is the starting line, not the finish line in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's a great gift, and it's a great treasure that we have. And if you're here tonight and you're suffering, no matter how many times you feel like you've fallen, there is an answer. There is an answer. I also want to talk about the old timers, the folks whose shoulders we stand on, the reason we're sitting here. If you're here tonight and you're an old timer, and even if you don't consider yourself one, maybe the people you sponsor consider you one. I'm not sure. But welcome and thank you for being here. Right? You guys have a legacy for us, and we hope to carry that on. And I want to talk about the third group in Alcoholics Anonymous, which is everybody in between those bookends. I got to tell you, in my journey in Alcoholics Anonymous, there's been great times. There's been emotional times, been very sad times. There's been all kinds of times. And if you're here tonight and your stomach aches about what just has happened to you, or something's come back and you can't seem to shake it, or you just don't feel like you're on the beam, again, I want you to know that you're welcome. And look, we talk a lot about the people who are at their first meetings, and we should, rightly so. But mostly I'm concerned with the people who consider this to be their last meeting, that for whatever reason they're sitting in their homes or their libraries or their cars or wherever they might be tonight, and they're thinking, this just isn't working for me. I've been around this thing. I talk the game. I know the language. I can repeat all kinds of cliches, and I can repeat language back and forth, and yet I'm dying on the inside. And I've been around long enough. I should know better. I've been around long enough. I don't know how to tell anybody I'm suffering tonight. Well, to those folks, I want to tell you that there's hope. I want to say to you that we have all been at different points in our sobriety and our recovery, and that God is a loving God. And he is deeply desiring, I believe that, to fix and to heal whatever is ailing us. And I didn't know that when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous. I really had no idea that. I thought I had walked away from God. I thought he had walked away from me, and I couldn't blame him at all. Having done some of the things I had done, I couldn't fathom a loving God who could love a person like me. It just wasn't in my head. I couldn't contemplate a God who would be charitable and gracious and kind to a person who had done the things I had done to some of his kids. So I believed in God when I came here. I just couldn't fathom there would be a level of compassion in the universe or beyond it that could allow a person like me a second chance. It was eye-opening. When I crash landed in Alcoholics Anonymous, I was 24 years old, and I had really no idea what was wrong with me. I truly thought that I had a drinking problem. And of course, I had something significantly worse and something significantly different. I had alcoholism, which I didn't know what that was. And so I kind of wandered through Alcoholics Anonymous, went to a bunch of meetings and listened to some people who were talking, and ran into a couple of people that seemingly really just, man, their message just touched me. I could sort of relate to what they were saying. And it was interesting to me that we had very different drinking stories. Like I've never had a DUI. I should have had a ton of them, but I've never had one, right? People were divorced, right? I've never been divorced. Now, I couldn't get anybody to marry me, right? Which is a pre-qualifier for divorce, but they would run way before we got to that point, and rightly so. I've never been to prison, right? Now I've been to jail, and I think from a newcomer perspective, a huge difference, right? Prison and jail, not the same thing at all. I mean, I had just had some misconceptions about what this thing was, and why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't I? Everyone that I had talked to prior to all of you about my drinking was not alcoholic. Everybody that I talked to about my problems in life as they related to alcohol was a non-alcoholic. And so they would give me non-alcoholic advice. Things like, hey, why don't you just go out and have a couple tonight? And I would think, gosh, that's brilliant. I'm going to do that. Or you know what, why don't you leave at 9:30? Why don't you stop staying till midnight? Like get out of there at 9:30, 10 o'clock. That'll solve it. And I'm going, hey, that's brilliant, And I truly thought those things would work for me. And when they didn't, I somehow felt as though I was morally incompetent or weak-willed, or I just wasn't trying enough, or there was some level of apathy in me that was just lame, or I don't know. Or I would get to this spot where I would think so ill of myself. I had no idea what was wrong with me. And I ran into this guy. I was sober about 60 days in Alcoholics Anonymous, and that guy's name was Joe Friday. And Joe's passed now, but Joe became my first sponsor. And that guy absolutely changed my life. He had a very different view of alcoholism and recovery from it than I did. And so here I am, I'm 60, 90 days sober. I want to ask Joe to be my sponsor. And by the way, we had nothing in common, nothing at all. I was from the south side of Chicago. I had grown up there. Joe was a country guy from South Dakota. I had moved recently from Chicago to South Dakota for work. And I was newly sober in AA, and I had this job, and I went and took it, and I was just living in this terrible flea-bitten hotel, trying to stay sober one day at a time and going to meetings. And there was this one guy in this sea of people who seemingly could translate what the sea of people was saying to me. I'd leave a step 2 meeting, and I wouldn't know what you were talking about. And I'd see Joe after the meeting. He'd be sitting there having some coffee. And I'd say, Joe, this is what they said in that meeting. And he could sort of translate, right? Alcoholics Anonymous wisdom to idiot, right? He could sort of he could build that bridge, right? From your wisdom to my lack of my foolishness, right? He could translate that. And so I asked him if he wanted to go to coffee. I had something to talk to him about. And we went to this place called the Crackpot. How ironic. And this place was, back in those days, you were like, you had to smoke and drink coffee. And so we're chain smoking and we're chugging coffee, right? And Joe and I were sitting there talking. And I said, Joe, would you be my sponsor? And he said, I don't know. And that didn't seem very charitable to me, but here's what he said. He said, I'll tell you what, Mike, I'll tell you my story. You tell me your story. And after that, if we think we can work together, I'll sponsor you. I said, okay, that'd be great. So he started to tell his story. And truthfully, I didn't listen to much of what he said because I was writing my own. I don't know if you guys have ever had that situation where you're waiting for a time to jump in, right, and say the right thing. And so as Joe's talking, I'm sort of listening to him, and I'm preparing my own story. And finally he finishes. And he said, okay, tell me your story. And so I did that. I started to tell him my story, and I didn't get very long into it, maybe a minute, maybe 2. And he just sort of cut me off. And he said, kid, you have no idea what alcoholism is, do you? Now I was 24 years old. I had drank for about 12 years. In some circles, that's a lot. In other circles, that's very little. I don't know. I was young enough where likely if I had stayed sober, my body would have healed. But I got to tell you, inside of me was a void and an agony that, at least in my experience, I would put up against anyone else's. As I looked at my agony, I couldn't take it anymore. And I said, no, I know what alcoholism is. And he said, well, what is it? And I said, it's when you're drunk a lot. And he said something that radically changed my opinion of alcoholism and recovery from it. And he said this. He said, drunkenness and alcoholism have almost nothing to do with each other. And if you're new here tonight, that may seem really odd, right? How could drunkenness not have anything to do with alcoholism? We say, well, it doesn't, it's not that it has nothing to do with alcoholism. It's just not alcoholism, right? Drunkenness is the problem for people who have a drinking problem, right? That's not what I have. And I didn't know that as I sat across the table from this gentleman. And so he said, Mike, let me just talk to you for a little bit. And he continued to describe some things to me. And again, I'm new, right? So he knows for a fact, I have no idea what's in this big book. I mean, I'm new. So he could have taken that opportunity to look down his nose at me with all of his wisdom and all of his knowledge in AA and belittle me for not knowing things and talk like a superior intellect, some intellectual in AA and lay all this stuff. He didn't do that. He didn't do any of that. Joe is a great student of the book, but he didn't take that knowledge and beat me over the head with it. He simply walked me through some questions. And the first thing he asked me was this. Hey, Mike, have you ever gone out somewhere and you've decided not to get drunk and end up insanely intoxicated? And I said, well, you just described like the last, I don't know, 8-10 months, a year of my drinking. And truthfully, if you're here tonight, I got to tell you, that's the truth for me. Especially in those latter days of my drinking, I harmed everyone around me and I didn't want to. I was pained by the agony I put my family and the people I love through. I wanted to stop doing that. And I was sincere. I just had no concept about how to do that. And so I would try really hard to not make the same mistakes night after night after night. And I did repeat the same mistakes night after night after night. And I could not figure out why. And I took all that really good advice that I got from non-alcoholic people, which applies to non-alcoholic people. It just doesn't apply to this alcohol. It doesn't apply to alcoholic people, right? And I said, yeah, I did that. I did that all the time. And he said, well, have been times where you just literally like, you stayed home because you weren't going to get drunk. You weren't going to go out. You weren't going to have that same behavior repeated. And you would set things up to modify your drinking. And I went, yeah, man, I would stay home. I would tell myself to leave at halftime. I would only bring $20 with me instead of $60 with me because I knew I would be okay if I just stayed in that $20 range. Well, we all know what happened, right? I'd find a good guy like Rob or Dustin and I'd go borrow $40 off them and I'd keep the night going, right? Or if somebody wasn't looking, I'd lift Janie's wallet or whatever I would do, but I would make something happen, right? And I had no idea why I was doing those things at all. And he said, Mike, in Alcoholics Anonymous, we have this book. And this book talks a little bit about what maybe you're going through. Again, no belittling, no sort of, I know everything. He just talked to me. He just respectfully talked to me, one peer to another. And he talked about this gentleman named Dr. William Silkworth and how Dr. Silkworth came up with this idea, this theory, based on working with tens of thousands of alcoholics, that for some reason, physiologically, there's something wrong with us. And Dr. Silkworth described that in very generic terms as an allergy. And I got to tell you, I'd never heard that before. I had never considered that my body, my physiology may have something to do with what was going on in my life. It was radically different than how I thought of it. And as we slowly walked through some of that, I had to get to the spot where I conceded that. Basically how that works, that allergy to alcohol is this. When I start drinking, I have an inability to control the amount I take once I start. What does that mean? That means no matter how many times I've promised people I love, right? Girlfriends at the time, family members, certainly my mom, my sister, other friends that were around me, a judge, police officers, no matter how many times I swore I wouldn't repeat the same crazy, intoxicated behavior, I did. And I meant those promises. Now, they may not have believed me because I broke them all the time, but inside of me, I was sincere. When I said I didn't want that, I really didn't want that. I just couldn't pull it off. I couldn't figure out what was wrong. And that idea of having some sort of physiological, something wrong with me, this allergy really landed with me. And then he said, but that's not the only thing. He said, in the doctor's opinion, and this other chapter, Mike, that we call more about alcoholism, and in there is a solution, it talks pretty specifically about this thing that we call a lying mind, right? We certainly have an obsession to alcohol, but really, Mike, what that book talks about is that our minds tell us stories and we just believe them. And I got to tell you, that struck me because truthfully, I live by this rule. If I think it, it must be true. It never dawned on me that maybe what was going through my noggin wasn't accurate. It never dawned on me. And so, look, if the first drink is the problem, because it triggers the allergy and the phenomenon of craving develops, and I go through the well-known stages of a spree, I was blaming my problem on drink 11, 12, 13, right? Turns out it wasn't 11, 12, and 13. It was the first drink. So why would I go back to it? Well, if this is the problem, then it would be all of the thoughts that preceded the first drink, all of them, all the stories I'd tell myself. And the way I looked at the whole world was the problem. I didn't know that. And so Joe said, Mike, did your mind ever lie to you about what would happen to you when you drank? And I had to concede that too. You know, I got to be honest with you. My head never told me, Mike, if you drink tonight, you're going to hurt the people you love. Not once. Didn't say that once. Mike, if you drink tonight, you're going to spend more money than you have in your wallet. Never told me that. Hey, Mike, if you drink tonight, the police are going to show. She's going to find out about her. Your boss is going to, your family's going to, your friends are going to. Never told me that once. Never once. What my head told me were things like this. Come on, dude, really, seriously. You're 22, 23 years old. What, are you never going to drink again? Seriously. You know what? Leave at halftime, right? Tell you what, you're smarter than this. All that stuff that happened last night, like clearly, just stay away from the shots, right? Just have beer, fine, just relax, right? Look, Mike, this is me having a conversation with me. Like I'm serious, right? This is all going on right here. I'm asking me questions and I'm answering questions that I'm asking me. Like, I don't know if anybody ever has had that. But when I'm having a dialogue with me about that first drink, there's a problem, right? Because I never win that. And it never tells me what its ultimate goal is. See, I think alcoholism's primary goal for me is death, but it will settle for me drinking again, right? And so its primary purpose, my alcoholism's primary purpose is to make sobriety suck so bad that I go back to drinking, right? It is lurking, waiting for a story to tell me about either how bad my life is or how great I am, either end of the spectrum, just to get me to take one or two. Because it knows if I take one or two, this body's going to trigger that allergy. I'm off to the races. And so he said, Mike, do you have an allergy to alcohol? And honestly, as I sat there in that cafe with Joe Friday that afternoon, I had to concede that after he explained it to me. And then he said, Mike, do you have this mind that lies to you? And I said, yeah, I have that too. And he said, you know, Mike, I have a feeling, I've watched you now for a little while, and I have a feeling that your mind lies to you about more things than just the first drink. You know, I had to concede that too. My mind lied to me about everything. It lied to me about your religion and your income level and how different our lives were and how unique I was and at different times how fantastic I was and at different times what a maggot I was. It lied to me about everything because I live by that rule that I talked about. If I think it, it must be true. And he said, before we go into the good news, I got to tell you the bad news. And I said, well, what's that? And he said, well, Alcoholics Anonymous can't help your body. We're not doctors. If you have the allergy, you're going to have the allergy until the day they throw dirt on you. So if you get 2 weeks of sobriety or 2 days or 22 years or 52 years, if you drink again, that allergy is going to kick off and it's going to be right back to the way it was. the other thing is, and I don't know how this works around the world, I just know in Sioux Falls, and it was important that he pointed this out to me. But in Alcoholics Anonymous, our membership is not, we are not counselors, therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists. That's not what we do here, right? I'm sure it doesn't happen wherever you're from, but I've run into people, right? And he said, so we can't fix your brain. And I said, wait, let me get this straight. You just walked me down this hole, painted me into a corner to admit that my body and my mind were ill. And then you're going to look across the table with me with a serious face and say, and you have no help for that. And he goes, that's exactly what I'm saying. I said, that's horrible. He goes, it's not only horrible, Mike, it's hopeless. It's hopeless. You see, Alcoholics Anonymous, Mike, is not a message of hope. Never has been, never will be. Pray to God it never becomes that. And I just looked at him like, what are you doing? And then he said, Alcoholics Anonymous is not a message of hope, but it is a message of hopelessness followed by a message of hope. You see, Mike, if you don't know that you're screwed, if you don't know that you cannot do this on your own power, you won't do the work. You'll find a back door. You'll settle for meeting attendance. You'll settle for service work only. You won't go to this thing that we need you to go to in order to radically change your life. And so he said, in Alcoholics Anonymous, we don't work on the allergy and we don't work on the mind. What we work on is the third part. And I said, well, what's that? And he said, that's your broken soul. That's the part of you that longs and needs God to radically transform you so that you can live a different life. And I was like, wow. And it kind of startled me a little bit. And he said, do you have a broken soul? Now, I don't know about anybody on this call, but when he used that wording, when he used that phrasing, it's called spiritual malady, he had all these terminologies for it, right? But it's those terminologies really scared me. You see, I told you how I came in, right? I couldn't fathom a loving God who could be kind or loving to a person like me who had hurt his kids the way I did. And so I said to him, well, he said, Mike, do you have a broken soul? Just like he asked me about the allergy in the body. And I said, well, I don't know. Because there was a part of me that didn't want to admit that. There was a part of me that, man, that scared me. I didn't know where we were going all of a sudden, right? But when we're talking about not drinking, that's one thing. But when we're going to start talking about what's going on inside of me, that's a totally different thing. And it scared me. And so I told him, I said, I don't know if I have a broken soul. I felt like I did. His terminology really grabbed me. But I said, I don't know, out of fear. And he said, well, I'll give you a few tests. He said, the number one symptom of a broken soul, Mike, is lack of power. Lack of power. He said, is it wrong to lie? And I said, well, yeah, of course it's wrong to lie. And he goes, do you lie? Well, only when absolutely necessary, right? Under certain conditions and guidelines, maybe, right? He said, Mike, is it wrong to objectify women? And I said, well, yeah. And he goes, how's that relationship you're in? Not so good. Hey, is it wrong to be disrespectful to your parents? Yeah. Hey, when was the last time you had a nice conversation with your mother? Oh man, he went through this list. He must have asked me 20 to 25 behavior questions, all of which, by the way, I got right. I got every one of those right. And then he asked me 20 to 25 application questions, and I got every one of those wrong, right? He said, Mike, that's the difference. The depth of your powerlessness is the distance between you knowing what to do and your ability to actually do it. See, Mike, I've heard you in meetings and you're complaining a lot about your mom and how your dad died when you were 6 years old and how he's your hero. And by the way, this stuff all in the back is for my dad because he is my hero. I love that man. I look up to him still today. And he's just a phenomenal human being. And he had tremendous integrity and tremendous honor. And then there was me, right? And I was not, I was lost. He was so solid and I was lost. And I felt like that had burdened me so bad that I had this reason to drink or the poverty that my family came out of, right? That somehow that gave me reason and license to be an idiot. But it doesn't, right? And so he said, by the way, this family that you criticized, just want you to know one thing, Mike. You got all the behavior questions right. That tells me you know how to live. Whatever their faults might have been, they taught you that much. He goes, but you couldn't pull it off. So you needed someone to blame because God forbid it's you, right? And I went, oh man, it was amazing to me. And I had to concede all three positions, that I did have an allergy to alcohol, that I did have a mind that lied to me, and that I did have something wrong with me spiritually, that I had a broken soul. And I got to tell you, it felt freeing to admit that finally, right? I wasn't holding on to anything. I was just a mess. And Joe wasn't walking away from the table. He sat there with me. And he said, tell me what you think of God. And I said, well, I don't really know. And I was raised Catholic, and I just didn't know. I didn't know how to answer that question. And so we just talked for a little while, and he had me listen to some talks, and he had me just sort of be around. And he said, well, tell me about the people you've seen in meetings. And of course, through that process, I came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. Not sure I walked in with it, but I'm real sure that you guys infected me with it. By the way, thank you for that good infection, right? And the idea is that as I listen to your stories, you know, and I mean this with no disrespect, some of you did worse things than I did. And God seemingly still helped you. Some of you did horrible things, right? And God still helped you. And so my horrible things, maybe God could help me with. Maybe. And I got tremendous hope from hearing your stories. And over time, I came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. And the way I look at that now is this. You know, I've never seen the wind, not once. I'm 53 years old. I have never seen the wind. I look out my window every day and I see something called the effects of the wind. You know, I've never seen God. But when I come to these Zoom meetings, and when I come to the meetings in my local area, when I get the opportunity to travel around a little bit in Alcoholics Anonymous, I've never seen God. But I've seen the effects of him everywhere, right? The smiles on your faces, the reunited families, as our book says in the second edition, forward to the second edition, right? The ministration, the hand of God is alive and well in Alcoholics Anonymous, right? And if you're out there tonight and you're suffering, he's got your back. Trust me, he's there. And so Joe and I talked a little bit about God, and he said, do you believe that God can restore you to sanity? And I said, yeah. And he said, okay, done. Let's keep moving. See, I thought there was going to be this big, long lecture on theology, and there wasn't, right? He pointed out a few things in the book, right? And then we moved on. And one of the things he pointed out is on page 62 in our book. And it says that, first of all, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. That was evident, right? That was evident. It wasn't working. It said next hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be our director, right? That he is the principal and we are his agents. That he is the father and we are his children. That God was going to be three things and I was going to be two things. And making a commitment to that process was step 3. That God was going to be director, principal, and father. And I was going to be child and agent, right? And there's a whole bunch of stuff on that. But the one thing I want to chat about just briefly is the father part. That was a big deal to me, right? Most men have a big thing for their dad. At least I did, right? And the men I sponsor do, whether they didn't like it or did like it. And, you know, again, well, my dad wasn't there. I wasn't raised with a dad, so I don't know, right? All this stuff. I was taught something in AA, right? There's only 2 reasons why people ask questions. 2 reasons, that's it. The first reason, they actually want to know the answer. It's called honest inquiry. I really want to know the answer. The second reason people ask questions is to avoid what they already know, right? Maybe you've been in an argument with somebody challenged you. Why did you do this, Mike? And my response is, well, I'll tell you what, why didn't you do that? I answer their challenge with another question because I'm avoiding what I already know. And when Joe said to me, tell me about what good fathers do, all of a sudden this thing came up. And I said, good fathers love their children. And he said, that's exactly right. He said, what do good children do? And I said, well, they love their fathers. He said, no, they don't. I said, what? Wait, what? He said, let me ask you again. Don't overthink it. Don't overthink it. What do good fathers do? I said, good fathers love their children. He said, that's right. I said, what do good children do? He said, what do good children do? And I said, good children love their fathers. He said, no, they don't. No, they don't. And I said, I'm not following you. He said, look, I know your dad passed away, but let's use your mom, for example. He said, did you ever get in trouble with your mom? And I said, I told him this story one time, and we used to always play in the streets in Chicago. We'd run around the streets and in between these parked cars, we'd race back and forth. And I said, every time I did that, my mom would open the door and she'd say, Michael Jude, get on the sidewalk, right? And I knew when the middle name was called out, I was in some trouble, right? And so what would I do? I'd go right back on the sidewalk. And as soon as that front door shut, guess where I went? Right back in the street, you know? And this would happen 2 or 3 times. And finally she'd tug on the earlobe or grab me by the belt loops or something. And I'd be thrust into the house. And that would be the end of my afternoon in the summer, right? He said, what was all that about? I said, I don't know. He said, here's the problem. It wasn't that your mother didn't love you. Of course she did. Here's the problem, Mike. Here's the problem. You didn't let her love you. You rejected all of her wisdom all the time. You see, children let their fathers love them. And that's something you've never done, Mike. You've never had the humility to just let God love you and let him make you into what he wants you to be. You always demanded that he do it your way. And, you know, I had to concede that. He was right. He was right. And so we went through this process and we got to this spot. And we got down on our hands and knees and we said this 3rd step prayer. And he said to me, while we're down here, I just want to be very clear that when we get up, it doesn't mean that you have completed the 3rd step after we say this prayer. He said, the 3rd step is not a prayer. The 3rd step is a public verbal declaration that you're going to work steps 4 through 12 after we get up, rather than just simply a prayer. And he opened the book to page 64, and the very first sentence on page 64 says, though our decision, meaning step 3, was a vital and crucial step, it could have little permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face, and I was taught that steps 4 and 5, and to be rid of, and I was taught that 6 through 12, the things in ourselves which had been blocking us. So step 3 is a declaration that I'm going to finish the process rather than just some prayer. And I got to tell you, I don't know about anybody on this call, but as I said, I was raised in a church as a young boy, and I remember prayers, and I remember hearing that God loved me, and I remember that he had done all that I needed in life while he was here. He completed it for me. I remember hearing all that stuff. And I got to tell you, I said honest and sincere prayers when I was out there. Maybe some of you have as well. I said them next to toilet seats as after puking my guts out. I've said them in the back of police cars. And honestly, the most agonizing ones sometimes were when nothing radical happened. It's just that someone I loved had turned their back on me and they'd had it and they were walking away. When I would see their spines as they were walking away from me, and I'd say those, please God, just do something. I don't know. Please help me. Please help me. I don't know if anybody had those prayers, but I said, and we call them foxhole prayers where I come from, and somehow they get a bad rap. And I got to tell you, man, that was the most sincere prayer I could say at that time in my life. And they were honest and they were sincere and they were gut-wrenching, and I meant every word of them. So why did I go back? Well, I think there's a big difference between the prayers we say in Alcoholics Anonymous and the prayers I said when I was out in the world, running around by myself. You see, after every single prayer in Alcoholics Anonymous, they give us work to do so that the prayer can be applied to my life, rather than just sort of verbally yelling out to God, which is beautiful and accurate and fine. No worries on that. But what I didn't know when I said those prayers next to the toilet seat or in the back of the police car is that if I went back and lived exactly the same way I lived prior to that prayer, I'm almost asking God through my actions, which are likely louder than my words, to just stay away from me. Just leave me alone. I'm going to do this my way, right? If you can help me do it my way, I'd love your help. If you want me to do it your way, I don't know about that, right? But if you can help me do it my way, please give me all the help you can. Right? I didn't really know I was insinuating that in those prayers, but I got to tell you, that's exactly what was happening. And so what Joe said was, when we get up and we work 4 through 12, that's actually going to be your solution. And the reason it's going to be your solution, Mike, is because it's actually going to be the fulfillment of the decision you make in 3. As you do 4 through 12, you will be giving your will and your life over to the care of God as you understand Him, rather than just deciding to. That made sense to me. And so we said that 3rd step prayer, and we got up off our knees, and he handed me a piece of paper and a pen. And he told me to write down my resentments, my fears, and my sex conduct. And I did that. And we went through these little Joe and Charlie boxes, and I did all the stuff he told me to do. And we got to him, and he said, there's another part of this 4th step that often gets overlooked, Mike, and we're not going to overlook it. And I said, what's that? He said, that's the praying part. He said, in resentments, if you look there, what it says is, and we often talk about prayer and resentment, right? There's this story, and we're supposed to pray for that person for 14 days, and the resentment's supposed to go away. And I get that. You'll never hear me talk anyone out of not praying for someone they resent. I think that's fine. But if I look at the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, the text tells me to pray for me. Isn't that weird? It says, God save me from being angry, as if I'm the chief victim of my own resentments. Right? Dear God, show me how I might be helpful to this person that I resent. So I'm supposed to love and serve the person I resent? Yes. Yes. Well, that seems fake to me because I feel resentment. Well, we're not going to worry about that right now. That's more 8 and 9. Right now, we just want you to say the prayers. And there's prayers for fear. And there's prayers for sex. Right? On page 70, there's 4 prayers that we're to pray for sex. Right? And then I got all that written down, and Joe set up this deal for me to go see this priest who was a longtime member of Al-Anon in our area, and he heard hundreds and hundreds of 5th steps. And so I'm sitting with this guy, and I'm telling him my story, right? And he's listening, and we were there for 6 hours, and after that, Joe sent me home. There's a whole thing there, and I know we're running out of time here, and I only got 15 minutes left or so, and there's a couple things that really matter to me that I want to share with you because I love you so much, and I'm appreciative that I'm here, and I don't want to miss that opportunity to share those things with you. And but it's important to know that I'm here not because I'm smart or willfully don't drink or any of that stuff that we sometimes hear. I'm here because I can't do those things. And a gracious God reached into the gutter and yanked me out and gave me this book and all of you so that I could have a new life. Anyway, so there's these questions on the bottom of 75, right? Are the stones properly in place? Have we tried to make mortar without sand? And I think essentially what those are asking me is, Mike, are you being sincere? Or are you kind of being the fraud you were before you came to us? And if I can answer to my satisfaction on 76, I'm supposed to look at willingness because it's supposed to be indispensable. Can I now let him have all of it? Can he have all my defects, every single one of them? And it's beautiful, right? That 6th step doesn't condemn us, whatever our answer is. Because there were some defects I wanted God to take. I was begging God to take them. And then truthfully, there were some things that were so attached to who I was, and I was so afraid of who I would be if I let them go, that I wasn't willing. And all the book tells me, all the book says to me is pray for what you don't have. If you don't have the willingness to let this defect go, Mike, hit your knees and ask God to grant you the willingness that someday it will actually appear in your heart and in your life, and you'll let him take them. That's all it says. Pray for what I don't have. And then the beautiful 7-step prayer, which we don't have time to get into tonight, but 2 hours on that. What I was told is the 6th and 7th step, right? That those are simply prayer requests. That's all they are. But God will answer those prayer requests in 8 and 9. And so what I wanted to do and what I wanted to have was 6 and 7 be a magic wand. That I just sort of say the prayers and then God takes the defect away and I never have to go near 8 and 9. That's not my experience. I sponsor a lot of guys in Alcoholics Anonymous. I have a sponsor as well. And I am not only have a sponsor, I'm actually sponsored by my sponsor. Just think about that one. Okay. And I have guys, and I got to tell you, for some reason, I bump into these guys with 4 to 12 to 20 years who have so much baggage from never completing 4 through 9 the first time. 4 through 9 the first time, right? And thank God we're still here and all that's great. But truthfully, like I hear this a lot. I've been around this amount of time. It's time for me to do another 4-step. And maybe it is. Believe me, I'm not saying no. I'm just saying maybe it's time we completed 4 through 9 for the very first things that you wrote down. And invariably, I find unmade amends through those times, right? And we hold hands and we walk through it together. We don't send anybody out into the desert by themselves. We're doing this together, right? And so I did. I made amends to my father. I went to his grave. I wrote him a letter and I asked his forgiveness for not reflecting the honor that he lived in his life, in my life. And although nothing happened, the sky didn't open. I didn't see my father come down. Nothing like that, right? What did happen to me is I left that gravesite feeling closer to my father than I ever have in my entire life. And that somehow he was helping me. I didn't really understand that at the time. I don't understand the economy of heaven. I don't know how that stuff works, but I can tell you that I know that my dad was with me and close to me. And that was all I ever really wanted in my life, was to know that he loved me and he was near me. I paid back hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars to my mom. As a matter of fact, it was somewhere in the neighborhood of about $2,100, because I would open her window at night while she slept, and I would walk into her house, break into her window, and steal money out of her purse and booze out of her fridge and food out of her fridge. And I made all that amends. And I struggled with this one. I really, really wrestled with it. And I would say to Joe, I said, look, I've apologized. I've paid back the money. It's not working. He said, Mike, you're missing the point here. You see, you think you had a bad mother. The truth is, she had a bad son. You see, you don't know how to be a son. And so we're going to teach you how to be a son. Questions every week. And the first question was, Mike, Mom, how was your week? Just a very simple question. Mom, how was your week? And whatever she answered, I was to follow it up with, wow, that sounds interesting. Could you tell me more about that? And what happened was, at first, because I was new in this, she didn't trust me very much. And why should she? She had no evidence to trust me any more than the first day I walked into AA. And so I'd ask, hey, Mom, how was your week? And she'd say, fine. And I would say, wow, that sounds interesting. Could you tell me more about that? Really fine. Click, But over weeks and weeks and weeks of doing that, her answers became very legato. They became drawn out and were flush with detail. And I was amazed at it. Well, I'm going to church on Sunday with Roberta across the street, and then she and Kitty and I are going to go to breakfast, and I got to take Cleo to the vet. And although those may seem very insignificant things to everyone on this call, to my mom, that was her life. My mom began to share her life with me. When I met you, she wouldn't talk to me. She wouldn't hug me. I can bring you to the spot in her house after 7 months of sobriety where she finally put her arms around me. Joe would send me home at holidays to go hug my mom. And I said, my mom doesn't hug me back. He said, I'm not asking your mom to hug you. I'm telling you to go hug your mom. And after 7 months of sobriety, I put my arms around my mom. This one time, it was a St. Patrick's Day weekend, 1992. And for the first time in I don't know how long, I felt my mom's arms come up behind my lower back, and she pulled me into herself. And I got to tell you, if I would have settled for sobriety in Alcoholics Anonymous, that moment wouldn't have happened. Because sobriety is not our answer. Sobriety is the starting line in Alcoholics Anonymous. It is not our finish line. Right? It's the starting line. So this process went on with 8 and 9 through all kinds of things. I paid off tons of debt. I didn't file federal income tax for 4 years prior to joining Alcoholics Anonymous. And I got all that worked out with an accountant, Illinois state tax. I got all that cleaned up and paid for. I went through the process with girlfriends and women I had hurt, looked them in the eye and told them that they deserved more respect than I had shown them. And all of those things in some way sort of put me back together. I really believe that the magic in Alcoholics Anonymous is linked very closely to 9, 10, 11, and 12. It just is. It just is linked very closely to those 4 steps. Because I think that's where God's hand starts to put us back together. You see, when my head tells me, hey, Mike, you're a scumbag, you're a thief, you're an idiot, you're a liar, And before doing 8 and 9, there were periods at the end of those sentences. The magic of steps 8 and 9 is it takes those periods at the end of those sentences, of those lies I tell myself, which are true, by the way, up until I make amends. But once I make amends, all of those periods become commas. They all become commas, and I get to finish writing the sentence. I get to finish writing the story. So instead of saying, Mike, you're a liar, you're a fraud, you're a cheat, you're a thief, my head says, Mike, you're a liar, you're a fraud, you're a thief, you're a cheat. But that's how you used to be. See, now you're a repentant thief. Now you've paid it back. You're no longer a thief. If I give back everything I stole, I am not a thief. If I correct every lie I've told, I'm not a liar. I'm a person who used to steal. I'm not a person who steals. Right? This process of the amends is really, really powerful, and it's life-altering. 10, 11, and 12 for me is about living in the moment and trying as best I can to stay filled with God's grace and mercy so that he can love you through me. I think that's my job. Our book says that he has placed roles, right? I'm in the world to play the role that he assigns. And when I think of what that means to me, the very first person I think of is my wife. One of the roles he has assigned to me is to be a husband, and then to be a father, and then to be a grandfather now, which is amazing, by the way. I don't know if anybody has grandchildren, and I know you think your grandchildren are the best. You couldn't be more wrong. Mine are the best. That's another story. But the point is, right, I have these roles in life: sponsor, employee, employer, friend, AA member. How does he want me to behave in those roles? That must be really close to his will. Like, I don't know much about God's will. I don't know why he put rings around Saturn or invented something called, receding hairlines. I don't know why he did stuff like that, right? But I do know that he has called me to be the husband of my wife. It's nobody else's job. And if I don't act like that for her, if I don't give her the love that a husband is supposed to give the wife, regardless of whether the wife gives the husband the love, that's different. That's a separate conversation. That's between my wife and her God. This is about me and my God. My sons, the idea of engaging my children where they're at and looking them in the eye and sharing my heart and my life with them so that they can have better lives rather than just having kids. Grandkids, oh my gosh, they're the greatest, right? The men I sponsor, how am I living my life versus how am I calling them to live their life? I tell you, I have great sponsors. His name is Don L. He's out of Louisville, Kentucky. I love him. I always love the guy. The guy's unbelievable. But the truth is, the men I sponsor motivate me and change me more than Don ever has. Because for some reason, I feel such a responsibility to them to live the spiritual life that I encourage them to live, because I don't want to be a hypocrite. Don knows I'm an idiot. He's heard everything about me. It's never shocking when Don, I was a jackass yesterday. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Don, I was an idiot yesterday, right? I mean, he knows that. He's aware of that. He's aware of that. Well before I am sometimes. But the men I sponsor, I cherish them. They're looking at me, as silly as it sounds, to not just be someone who gives advice, but to be a brother who walks shoulder to shoulder this common journey with them. And I have to live that way for them, right? I want to close with this. When I was 7 years old, my mom and I were walking through Toys R Us, and my dad had just passed. It was the first Christmas after my dad had passed away, and I was 7 years old, and we came around this corner of one of the hallways where all the toys were. And if you remember being a kid in a toy store, it was like, oh my gosh, like Disney World, And we come around this corner, and I don't know, there's a lot of people from all over the world, and I don't know if you remember this show or not, but there used to be a show in the United States called Lost in Space when I was a kid, right? And there was this kid on there, and his name was Will Robinson. And I remember dreaming and fantasizing that I was Will Robinson, and Will Robinson had this robot. And this robot and Will Robinson went all over the universe and the galaxies, and they had all these adventures together, right? And the robot would really look out for Will Robinson. Danger, Will Robinson, danger. He'd do all that kind of stuff, right? We come around this end unit. On the corner unit are they're 3-foot tall dolls of this thing called Giant Robot from Lost in Space. And I just lost it, man. I was like, please, Mom, please, I'll be good forever. Please, please, please buy me this robot, right? And it was in November or something like that. And my mom said, she lied to me. She lied to me. She said, Christmas is right around the corner. And if you're a good boy, Santa might bring you one, right? Well, I was a bad boy, but I had a good mother. So Santa brought one anyways. She lied to me. And I remember opening it up on Christmas, man. And I was absolutely delighted. I was blown away. I couldn't believe it. And I remember that the couch was one planet and the chair was another planet. And we would pretend to walk down the stairs like we were walking in a crater in the moon. And I was just, man, I was all up in it. And all of a sudden, I don't know, it was maybe the 6th or 7th of January, my mom wandered off to this little store called Woolworths. And she bought like 7D batteries or 8D batteries. And she shoved it in the back end of this thing and it lit up like the 4th of July. I thought I was having fun before the batteries. Holy smokes. The fun I had after the batteries, I gotta tell you, man, nothing like it. This little thing came out of the back, and if you pushed one button, it rolled forward. If you push another button, it rolled backwards. You push the red button, danger, Will Robinson, danger. It was unbelievable. I submit to everyone on this call, wherever you're from, doesn't matter your background, your race, your creed, I'm just saying, if you have the threefold disease of alcoholism, that story is what we do here. You see, I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, batteries not included. I had no power, right? I had no power. And through the miracle of a guy named Joe Friday, he carried a message to me. But that message, it landed, of course. But I had to take the message he gave me and bring it to my life under his help and his direction through the guidance of that big book. And when I did that, I found a power greater than myself who lit me up just like that robot when I was a kid. And I got to tell you, if you're out here tonight, if you're a new person, you're welcome. If you're an old timer, thank you. And if you're someone in the middle with a broken heart tonight who thinks it's your last meeting, please stay. Stay. Call me. My number's in the group chat. We'll walk through the book together. We'll do the work. Or find someone in your local home group we'll do the work with. Whatever it is, open that book, do the work. Let God love you. Be a good child. Let him love you, right? And just know that you're not alone. And know that tonight can be the day, can be the moment that everything changes for you. Grab that book, open it up, do the steps. We're praying for you. We love you. God bless you. And thank you for having me.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you very much, sir.
I'm not the official speaker thanker today. Shauna will